In the book of Daniel, we're given one of the most intriguing prophecies about the Messiah. We're given a time frame when he's going to show up. Today, on Hot Topics, the Messiah prophecy. Hi, this is Robert Furrow. We're really glad that you found us and welcome to Hot Topics. If you're new here, consider subscribing and ringing the bell and liking this video. It really helps us get this ministry out to more places. The comments section below is open. We'd really love to hear from you. Daniel chapter 9 starts out with Daniel praying. He's looking at how long they've been in captivity, and he's looking backwards at a prophecy that tells them that they would be in captivity for 70 years. And the reason it's 70 years is because for 490 years, the children of Israel have not given the land their Sabbath rest. In the law, they were told that they were supposed to give 1 year's rest out of every 7. That was trusting God. It was like the Sabbath day. Work 6 days, take a day off. Work 7 years, take a year off. That would be great for us, by the way. But Daniel looks back to 490 years, 70 weeks of years. Remember that Israel not only had weeks of days, but they had weeks of years. And so he looks back to those 490 years that they didn't give any rest to the land. And so God took them out of the land in order for them to pay back 70 years. Daniel now looks, and they're coming very close to the end of that 70 years. In fact, if you look at the first people that were taken into captivity until the time that Daniel starts looking at it, it is very close to 70. And then he prays, and Gabriel shows up. And Gabriel, rather than just saying, you guys are about to go back into the land, which they were, he gives him a future prophecy, like Jeremiah's, that deals with 490 years, or 70 sevens, or 70 weeks of 7, and tells him that during these 490 years, there's going to be a bunch of things that are going to be completed with Israel. Let's take a look at what it says. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. So that's for Jerusalem and for the people of Israel. This 70 weeks again is in context 70 weeks of years. That's not a guess. You just go back to the context and you see that it is 70 weeks of years. And God, during this 490 years, is going to bring a completion for the people of Israel and for the holy city of Jerusalem. Here's the things it's going to finish. It goes on to say, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. That's quite a list. God's going to wrap things up completely, and he's going to do it with Jerusalem and the people of Israel. Did you know that the people of Israel were not in Jerusalem for hundreds of years? In fact, almost 2,000 years. They were called back again to Israel in the early 1900s. And today there's about 6 million Jews that are living in Israel. This prophecy couldn't have taken place unless God had already moved in our lifetime. So then he gives us the starting point for these 490 years, or these 70 weeks of years. He says in verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. Really important that you look at the details there. There's going to be a command that's given by a king to go and restore and rebuild Jerusalem. There are 3 options that people see as this starting point. There's Darius, there's Cyrus, and there's 2 by Artaxerxes. But only one of them says to go and rebuild Jerusalem. The other ones talk about going and rebuilding the temple. It even goes on to say in this section, the streets will be built again, and the walls even in troubled times. And only one of those possibilities talks about Jerusalem, talks about the streets, and talks about the walls, and that's in Nehemiah chapter 2, where Artaxerxes gives Nehemiah this command. Look at verse 25 again. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, from the time that that command is given until Messiah is on the scene, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks is 49 years. Josephus tells us that the whole rebuilding of Jerusalem took 49 years. So it fits. So there will be 7 weeks, 49 years, and then 62 weeks, which makes up a total of 69 weeks minus one week of years, or minus 7 years. That will be the future tribulation period. And so that makes up 483 years. And then the walls are built in troublous times, and the streets in Jerusalem for 49 years. And then there's a waiting game. We wait. And it's during the silent period in between the Old and the New Testament. And then all of a sudden, God begins to move again when the Messiah comes on the scene. In the early 1900s, there was an English police commissioner named Sir Robert Anderson who did a lot of work on this prophecy, and it holds up today. He found out that if you look at Nehemiah chapter 2 and you see the command of Artaxerxes to go and rebuild Jerusalem, that you can get a date from that because it gives the day. It is sometime in March in 445 BC. If you start at March 45 BC and you add 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, and you use the Babylonian calendar or the Persian calendar or the lunar calendar of 360 days a year, you wouldn't use the Julian calendar, you would use the one that it was written on, and you add up those years, you come to the early 30s in the first century. In other words, the early 30s were the ministry of Jesus. You start with that command, you add in those years, you break it down to days from a 360-day calendar, and you come to the time that Jesus was ministering on the earth. That is such an incredible, powerful prophecy. Sir Robert Anderson brought it down to April 6th of the year 32. He brought it to a very day, but I don't think you need to do that. And that's what caused a lot of people to question how he dealt with the year 0 and how he got to the exact day. But the prophecy doesn't say that it's the exact day Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey. What it does say is until the time of the Messiah. And it brings us right to the time that Jesus was ministering in Israel. This prophecy is reasonable evidence that you and I are believing the truth, that we are holding on to the truth of the pages of Scripture. It goes on not only to tell us that the Messiah would show up, but it would tell us some things the Messiah would do. Let's take a look at what it says in verse 26. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. This tells us that the Messiah is going to die, but not for himself. He gave his life as a sacrifice. Remember, this is a prophecy written hundreds of years before the time of Christ, literally about the Messiah, the Anointed One, and it tells us that he's going to be cut off, but not for himself. Very powerful. And then it says, and the people of the prince. Now we learn about a new prince, that is the Antichrist. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will be with the flood. That's a word for war in the scriptures. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. So the people of the prince who is to come is Rome. In 1966, they embark around Jerusalem. They siege it. They destroy it in 70, and they fulfill all of this prophecy. Jesus is cut off in 32 or 33, not for himself, and then they come in 66 and 70 and destroy the temple. It goes on to say then in verse 27 that he, that's this Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's the final week. Remember, these 70 weeks had to do with Israel and had to do with Jerusalem, and now our world is all set up, ready for God to restart this prophetic calendar to work with Israel again for 7 years, and the Antichrist is going to have a key part in that. There are other places in the Bible that we find this covenant. It goes on to say, he shall bring an end to sacrifices and offerings. In the beginning of this final 7-year period, he builds the temple, starts sacrifices. Sacrifices actually start again. I don't know how that comes to pass. The Dome of the Rock is there now. Maybe they build it beside it and build a wall between them. Maybe something happens to the Dome of the Rock. But in the beginning of the tribulation period, the temple is rebuilt. Ezekiel tells us the same thing. Revelation tells us the same thing. And sacrifices are begun again, but the Antichrist stops them. And then it says, and on a wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even unto consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolation. Now this abomination of desolation, many people believe that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled it in between the Old and the New Testament. But listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 24:15 through 22. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, in other words, Jesus saw that still in the future. that the abomination of desolation had not happened yet. It goes on to say, standing in the holy place, whom reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are on the housetop not go down to take anything out of the house. And let him who is in the field not go back and get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in the winter or the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until now, nor will there ever be. That's the tribulation period. It's not the time that the Romans destroy Jerusalem. It's the actual end of the world, when the 7-year period starts again and the last 3.5 years are called a great tribulation period. Jesus goes on to say in verse 22 of Matthew 24, and unless these days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, these days were shortened. One more thing about the Messiah showing up. When Jesus was making his way to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, they were waving palm branches and they were praising him, and he began to weep over Jerusalem. And here's what he said. Now, as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you especially in this day, the things which make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the day of your visitation. As Jesus is fulfilling prophecy, and as there's been a prophecy about the Messiah in Jerusalem in Daniel, Jesus gives us a prophecy about the city of Jerusalem, that they are going to be destroyed because they didn't know the time of their visitation. They knew. They looked at the scriptures, but they wouldn't believe it. We know from old commentaries of people before and after the time of Jesus that they read Daniel chapter 9 correctly, but they just didn't follow through. They didn't know the time of their visitation. They were given a prophecy that would show them exactly what it was, and they ignored it. What a warning for us that we don't ignore the things that God has clearly shown us. We don't know what time Jesus is going to return, but we know that we are supposed to be ready. Let's not make the same mistake that they made. Let's be ready when Jesus returns. If you like this video, click the like button below. It really helps. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.